welcome to another Wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at a not new game from Compass Games. This is The Lamps Are Going Out, 2nd edition. The 2nd edition being the new part.
Yeah, I don't know what changed, frankly, but it is a 2nd edition.
I don't
Mounted map board, probably.
Yeah, and maybe they just tidied up any errata if there was any, but I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I probably
Rounded counters, right?
But yes,
They're pre-rounded.
Presume
Very nice.
The production value has been kind of made premium. Yeah, pre-rounded counters, just punch everything out the board, play it immediately. It's very, very nice to play with. So this is a grand strategic World War I game for 2 players. There is an option to play it with 3 or 4, with them controlling the other
Some of the
faction
minor
alliances.
powers.
But primarily, I know a lot of you are going to play this as 2-player and have played this 2-player. But it's a very, very high level of World War One.
Yeah.
You play the entirety of the World War One as well. Yeah, you count as a full armies.
Yeah.
And it's very much at that scale that, frankly, a lot of World War One games are at as well. So yeah, you play 1914 all the way till 1918, and each year has 4 turns in it. And you play through those. You play one event, and then you move a couple guys and just do a whole bunch of attrition combats, basically. There's a production phase. There's a heavy economy element to this.
Which I really liked, the economy element. I thought that was very cool.
Well, and it's a huge key part of World War One. Huge part of World War One's identity. And then there's a little kind of mini technology phase as well, where you kind of researching, or like things like getting tanks, or submarine and anti-submarine warfare, or artillery technologies, things like that. On all of that's boiled down into, frankly, a very playable game.
We had a great time with this one. We really did. And it has been a long game.
Yes, this is not a short game. There aren't any scenarios in this. You just play the thing,
and it's the whole thing, the whole 1914 to 1918.
And the box say, I can't remember what it said.
I want to say it said 6 hours, but maybe I'm mistaken on that.
Average time to play 5 hours. Well, we're not average. I will say
because we're into hour 8.
Hour 8,
and we just hit 2017.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 1917.
2017.
Not 2017.
That's why it's taken so long.
That's why it's taken so long.
We've played 100 years of World War One.
Give me a break. It's really late. It's like 1:30.
Yes. So, we're a little bit loopy. But this is the first game of our Guns of August event where we're trying to play all of our World War One games. Wanted to kick it off with something that's on a grand scale to really kind of get some of that, a bit of everything flavor in it.
Yep.
The cards are gorgeous. They're really nice with the typeface, making it look a little bit like an old newspaper. And there's some history on each of the cards, as well as the little game effect that those events have. Yep. But like I said, the rule book, whilst I think it's like 30 pages. It might be less than that. Yeah, it's 30 pages. It doesn't. When you're actually playing it, it doesn't feel like a game with 30
Well,
pages.
I also don't know that the game is overly complex.
Yeah.
Meaning it has a very good sequence of play, and you literally just follow that sequence of play. It's pretty standard. It's easy to understand. I don't think the systems are very difficult. It's not a card-driven game, although it uses cards. It uses event cards and...
Yeah, the event card just gives you like a bonus or a little thing happens.
Or a detriment.
Yeah, and then you do stuff.
Yeah. You don't play a card for ops like, say, in a Paths of Glory, which I think this game is talked about in that same
Yeah, it's at a similar scale. It's a decently long game, right?
Yeah. This is area movement. It's not point-to-point movement, whereas Paths of Glory is point-to-point movement. But it's very well laid out. You can tell this map was put together very well to create choke points.
Yes.
One of the things I always look for in these games, as well as World War II games that deal with the East Front, is how this quagmire of Russia works. And the reality is very, very difficult for the Central Powers. It's very challenging. You attack here, you open yourself up.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that if you allow it to build up too much, particularly on that Eastern Front, it's going to get ugly.
Yeah, you get into the swirling mass of I go here, you go here, I go there, you go
Yeah.
here, and it's just it becomes a
Yep.
nightmare.
Whereas contrasting it on the Western Front, there's like 2 spots to attack. Right,
Yeah,
it's Belgium,
It's tight.
and then it's Verdun. Those are kind of the line, and you're attacking from the Rhine, and you're attacking from Hanover, and that's where the action happens. And more often than not, the Central Powers are going to swing around with that Schlieffen plan, and they're going to take out Belgium. I didn't.
Well,
Right?
yes.
Because we screwed a couple rules up early on. We didn't understand the strategy
we didn't understand the importance of committing very hard to that.
Right. You have to run at it really hard from the get-go.
Yeah.
So that you don't waste a lot of time building up there and allow the French and the British to pump resources in there. At this point, we are very stalemated, and it never got close to Paris. Not from the traditional route.
No.
I had the Austria-Hungarians kind of down on the southeast of France.
The Italians
coming
joined
up through
the
the
wall
Alps.
and then immediately folded like a deck chair, and the Austro-Hungarians just walked through.
Yeah, so they just kind of taken the Alps, and now they're getting ready to go to southern France, and Paris is right there, and man, it's very different. So this game ended up being a little bit ahistorical. The blockade never materialized for the British in the Atlantic because
the Battle of Jutland was a decisive German victory.
Oh, I rolled amazingly.
You rolled all the stuff, and I rolled nothing.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, gross.
And then all your boats died, so it's very expensive to put those things back. They cost what, 2 or 3?
3 to put them back full,
two for spent.
But I was by that point, you had the blockade.
Yeah.
So you were raiding me is what that represents. And then the submarine warfare was just killing me. Even though I had the anti-sub technology, just couldn't get any good results.
It never really... Our dice rolling was also absolutely awful.
Yeah. And
the entire game.
And that's one thing that you should know about this game. It is a lot of dice rolling.
It's not a bucket of dice, meaning you're not really rolling 10 dice at one time.
You roll 1 dice 10 times.
You roll 1 die for each of your units. Sometimes they roll 2 if they have artillery support.
Yeah.
But it's a constant rolling. It is a constant rolling.
And there are very few modifiers.
Yeah.
You get a defensive modifier if you're in a mountain, and if you're attacking and you attack successfully with your first attack,
you get your big push.
You get your big push +1, which you might lose if you
fail.
You mess up an attack.
But that can be very valuable in some of those early attacks.
Yeah.
Where you commit things. You also might want to use your artillery early so you get that +1 the next time. It's just, that part was very interesting, I think, about the combat system. There were a lot of choices. How do I use this artillery? What unit do I use first? There's some very cool events that go off that make some of your units more elite. I made an elite mountain division. I actually ended up, it's a German card. I put it on an AH unit.
Yes.
And it served me very well to break into Rome and take out Italy. You had some cards like that too, didn't you have?
I had a Western Allies inspired leadership.
Yeah.
He provided me re-rolls if those re-rolls would allow me to win. That was pretty cute as well. And then a lot of these, the front... I forget what it was.
Yeah, they were the little marker that gave you +2.
Frontline
DRM.
formations and stuff. Things like that were neat.
But yeah, not a lot of DRMs. Not a lot. It's basically, for the most part, straight up rolls. Attackers win ties.
Yeah, which is
unless,
nice for a change.
Yeah, unless they have air superior. The defender has air superiority.
Then they can win one tie because
they flip that. Well, they can win up to 3 if they have all their...
If you commit them all.
Pretty rare.
But you have to have all of them.
And then commit them all.
And they have none.
Yeah.
Because then you've won the dogfighting roll-off to be able to commit those. So there's some neat parts to it. But the reality is you've got your one counter. It's a whole army. There's,
tens of thousands
of
guys.
And you just... I roll a d6, you roll a d6. Who's got the highest wins, right? You get spent one way or the other. So in that way, from that standpoint, you don't have all the crispy, crunchy CRTs and DRMs.
Right.
So it's
column
more...
shifts.
It reminds me only from like kind of way that some of that feels of an Axis and Allies type of game, right?
Right, yep.
Where it's not it's not complex from a battle resolution standpoint.
Right.
Really. It's I've got a guy. I spend him to attack. I roll a die. You roll a die as a defender. Whoever's got the highest, you get spent as well. If every one of the defenders is spent and you can attack again
and score a
hit, then they all retreat.
Yep.
And you move in.
Very rarely does a unit get eliminated. They get eliminated.
Yeah, if there's nowhere for them to retreat.
If there's nowhere to retreat, sometimes cards would eliminate. Like it would say, if that first French unit to fall, if
you
loses by three or more, that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, if the Serbians don't have anywhere to retreat, they can be absolutely
destroyed.
Crushed. Yeah, most of the time, if units are being eliminated, it's because they're being forced to retreat out of their capital, and the country is conquered or collapses, and then they're removed from the board. Basically.
So I think the combat system actually works very well. I also think it's very thematic. It feels attritional. It feels. I mean, there's a lot of angst there.
And when you have,
a lot.
When you have the massive stacks, especially on the Western Front, you will roll a lot of dice, and a lot of dice will eventually even out to odds. You need more than good odds to really break through things.
I think that's the one thing I didn't like about the combat system. I felt like you really almost have to have a stupendous roll-off 6 times in a row, which happened a couple of times, for you really to make any meaningful progress. And that, once again, it's thematic, right? It's that concept of the mire of the Western Front and the trench warfare.
Yeah.
It actually works very well. There's parts of it that I don't like, and sometimes I was like, man, this just does not feel good at all. Especially when you do so poorly.
Yes.
And it was so important that you at least, because ultimately it's attritional.
Yep.
I'm trying to inflict more losses on you than you can replace.
Yes.
You have a limited amount of, the French have 4?
They got 4.
Generally. The British have 7.
A possible 7.
They can be as low as 4, I think, is the lowest.
1, 2, 3, 4. In theory, they could get down to 3.
Doesn't happen very often.
Yeah,
But that would be submarine warfare is going really, really well. The blockade is in place for the British, and there was some other.
And the East Asia Squadron, the Raiders,
that event comes out and haven't been destroyed.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, which never happened in our game.
No, I tried to,
and it only.
I ended up spending all of my fleets trying to kill that thing.
And that's when I crushed them. That's when I crushed them, when you spent them. But it is attritional. It feels like that. And I actually think it works well. I think after 8 hours of rolling and playing, I think at first I was like, I don't like that. By the end, I felt much better about it, even though I still sucked. and we still couldn't get those dice rolling. But that's cool. That's what this game I think is trying to do.
It was interesting because the game play is fairly light. It's rolling d6s against each other to attack each other. But there were so many times when I was, when I was preparing attacks and putting guys down, as I'm like, what am I trying to do? I am trying to... Taking ground isn't particularly important to me at this scale. What I'm trying to do as the Allies is I'm trying to attack you so that all of your guys are spent, so that A, they can't attack, and B, you have to spend all your money just replacing those guys.
Yep.
And it's a game of bleeding each other dry economically, and the first person to collapse will collapse, and you'll be able to roll over their dead corpse in 1918.
Yeah, theoretically it can happen like in 1917, 1918, but some things have to happen, but they're more often than not going to happen, like the Russian Revolution. And once Russia kind of starts to fall apart, although it's not as dramatic as you would think, it's not like all the units immediately retreat and go back to Moscow to fight the Bolsheviks.
Once it collapses, they do, but you've got there's warning signs.
There's conditions that have to be met. Yeah. And we never got to that point. I was close, but not close enough. But yeah, that's really well done. I also really enjoyed, because as the Central Powers I was controlling, the major power of Germany, They did most of the actions, had most of the units, had most of the money. They could assist their allies. The Ottomans, who didn't come in until 1914, the winter of 1914, so not the fall, but the winter turn.
Yep.
You can help them by giving them the amount of production equal to their production. You can't go above that. So the Ottomans had 1, so I could give them 1, and they would have 2.
But which makes a difference.
It does. That means they can build, replace a guy, and maybe bring a guy on that's spent, but get more troops out onto the board. You know, the Austria-Hungary is very interesting because it's the central part of Central Europe, really, and has to crush Serbia. That's one of their first goals. That should be done the first couple of turns. It took a lot for us.
Yep.
Because once that's done, the threat is eliminated because Greece isn't going to come into the game until way later, nor is Romania. So you really have nothing to worry about in that area. So I enjoyed that. I got to do this,
Yep.
and then attack Italy. I wiped Italy out, got some really favorable rolls, had some good things happen, and then I started putting pressure on France I enjoyed that. The different factions working together, controlled by the same player. I thought that was very cool, very slick. You had the same thing. France, Britain, and Russia all worked together.
Yeah, and like you said, this is a war game, but it has a pretty good, or at least a very interesting economic element to it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of games that are at this scale might not necessarily be World War One games. Mm-hmm. They put in economy stuff and it's very clunky or it's really deep and complex. I felt like this was so easy to learn.
Yeah.
From that standpoint, where I wasn't like, and now we get to the money laundering phase. Where like, oh, I got to get out my little notebook.
Yeah.
You get X amount of points. It's very rare that will change, or it's very obvious that it has changed.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you've lost territory.
Yeah.
And you spend those in a point to flip a guy. Great.
Yeah.
Most guys are going to be able to be flipped because it's so hard to get yourself out of supply in this game.
It is. It is very hard, and I was surprised a little bit by that, but...
It's just a scale thing.
Yeah, it's the scale. Yeah.
And it's, for me, a couple points to put out a trench. For you, a point to put out a trench.
Yeah, the Germans could build those trenches for 1 point. That was very nice. But you can't build trenches until spring of 1915.
But, I just enjoy, I don't know, the little... Again, not complex, but the little skeleton of this economic game is important. Because if I can do a bunch of damage to the Germans, you have to spend your stuff on your own forces and not pay for the Austro-Hungarians, who then I can damage with the Eastern Allies, knowing that they're not getting as much money in. Or I do a ton of damage to them, force the Germans' hand to give them a lot of money, whilst they have less money now.
Yep.
That's
a very interesting
It's such an important piece of World War One history that you read about in books all the time and learn about in school, and to have it in a game where it's not overwhelmingly complex, but also meaningful, was cool. I really enjoyed that element of this game.
Yeah.
I really, really did. Which was surprising because that's the least wargaming aspect of it, I feel.
Yeah, it's not traditionally in a war game.
I enjoyed it for what it was.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to talk about really quickly is the technology. Fairly interesting, but it was kind of random.
Yes.
You got a deck, you shuffled it up. If you draw out a later technology, you don't get anything.
Yep.
So and in your deck, I think you have 10 or 12 cards.
10 cards.
It's 5 of them are level 1 technology. So you're hoping desperately to draw those level 1s.
And draw them early and before your opponent.
Yes, because then you get that advantage. And then you can get some up to level 2 and even planes up to level 3. That was kind of cool. I would have loved to have seen some other type of element where maybe you were able to invest a PP into it to draw, say, 2 cards, put 1 back and keep... That may have broken the delicate balance.
Maybe, yeah.
When I think of technology, I think of investing.
Yeah,
this was more of just draw the
doing
card.
Something with a bit more purpose.
Yes.
I really want to do tanks. Let me do tanks.
Like a tech tree.
I think about Fields of Despair, where
Yes.
that one's like, you can push things into what you want to.
Yep.
And that gives you a bonus there.
Yeah, because you can put it into poison gas. You can put it into the air, air combat.
You put it into gas masks to counter those things.
I liked the way that was done.
Yeah,
but this worked. I mean, it worked. It's light, like the total scale of this game and the total feel of this game. It fit in.
Yeah, the reality is this is a game that you could play with basically anyone.
I agree.
It might look quite big. The rulebook might look like it's got a lot of words in it, but the reality is the gameplay is pretty easy to learn.
Yeah,
and so the technology mechanism of this is in line with that, right? You draw a card. Can I use it? Yes or no? Great.
Yeah.
If you can, great. You start building this little tree of cards you can then build off of. That's awesome. But yeah, that's the only thing where you're like, oh man, if there was going to be a little bit extra.
If I could tweak it, that might be one area that I would tweak.
And that's an us thing as well, I think.
I love tech trees.
Yes.
It's just always fun. That's one of the things I love about Space Empires, that concept of I can choose any technology. It's just so
Space
cool.
Empires, Eclipse, even Twilight Imperium.
I love
those space games all have that kind of cool stuff in
They
it.
do.
Tech trees and that stuff. Oh, love it.
Yeah. But I do think, once again, in the theme of this game and the way it's put together, this seemed to work.
It works, yes.
It just didn't always feel good when, I kept drawing technologies that I couldn't do.
But but again, it's one of those things where early war, it's kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah, it is.
You've got 5 level 1 cards. It's 50-50 you're going to get something that's useful.
Yeah.
But once you start getting a couple of those out, there's some 1 cards left. There's a bunch of 2 cards in there.
Yep.
Your odds improve to
you're going to get something every time.
The technology snowballs. So in the late war, you're either on a bit more even footing, or for that one turn where you've got the edge, you can you get the tanks out.
Yeah.
You can do some real damage.
Those tanks I wanted very badly. I think they were pretty cool. But once again, I enjoyed the game. There was a lot to like.
Yes,
there really was.
What I'll do is I'll show you the board and how it works, and then we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So here's a look at the map. As you can see, it is a very large scale of Central Europe, and it's divided up into sometimes countries, sometimes regions, and it's stacks of counters within that. It's not a point-to-point movement. Everything's just divided up into areas, almost in like an Axis and Allies style, where and because it's not an area impulse game either. You can pick a couple of units to move, it's not massively complex from that standpoint. There's no hexes. You're not regulated by point to point. You're regulated in the way that where the borders touch what's adjacent to what. So this is primarily a 2-player game, and I would probably always play it 2-player. It has the option to play 3 or 4 players, because you'll have 1 player as the Central Powers player, and then 1 player as the Triple Entente player, and within that, those factions or alliances are divided up. So you have the Western Allies, and you have the Eastern Allies, and that's the Triple Entente between Russia, Great Britain, and France originally. And then you have, for the Central Powers player, you have Germany as its own faction, sub-faction, I suppose. And then you have the Central Allies, so it's the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then Turkey's going to join them very quickly as well. And so you have actually 2 separate of these event decks. You see the German cards over here, Austro-Hungarians, or the Central Allies over here, and conversely with the Entente ones here. So the turn order is printed here. So Germany's going to do a bunch of stuff. Then the Western Allies are going to do a bunch of stuff. Then the Eastern Allies are going to do a bunch of stuff. And then the Central Allies are going to do a bunch of stuff. So, 1 player does 1 thing, this player does 2 things, that player does 1 thing. And that never changes. That's the structure of each one of these turns. It's about 4 turns per year. That's divided up into seasons. And that's kind of the course of the game. So if you were to divide this up into a 4-player game, you'd just be doing half as much. That would create more downtime as well. And I'll be honest, the Entente, so the Western Allies and Germany have more stuff to kind of do, and maybe some more interesting decisions to make. They're the ones who have access to developing new technologies. They're the ones who decide economically where to funnel money to, especially Germany. This can get quite stagnant, so maybe they do less movement than there is kind of out here, but it's, I don't know, dividing that up, I would play this 2-player. I guess that's what I'm saying. So, turn structure. What does it look like? Well, you do an event card, you do a couple moves, you resolve any combats that you want to do, and then you go into kind of like a economy production phase, basically. So we'll just kind of run through a German turn here real quick. The first thing that you do, and just so that we're all aware, there is a little sequence of play here. These plays are pretty thorough. If there was a couple more details in the sequence of play, it would be like tip-top. Just because learning the game, it just says, you do this phase, and then this phase. And it did, if it had like one extra little detail of like, this phase is move 2 armies, or just an extra that you could play off the play. You could almost do that with your very first play. But we needed to read a couple of the rules to do so. So you start with the event card phase. If it's the spring turn of a new year, you're going to add in that year's cards basically. But you just flip a card, and then you do what it says on the card. So it's not like a CDG in a sense of you have ops and events and a hand of cards. This is just like a thing that happens. It might give you a bonus. It might do something on the board. So this one, it says, this is the Lenin/Bolsheviks rise. If there's no revolutionary turmoil, which in our case there wasn't any to start with, you place the Russian Revolution marker on the revolutionary turmoil track. So that would kind of go there. This is 1917. This is going to start to collapse pretty quickly. If this was already there, though, if revolutionary turmoil is present, yes, that's the word, for the remainder of the game, whenever the Central Powers control 4 or more areas in Russia, and Russia does not control any Central Powers areas, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is signed, and Russia collapses. So basically, this starts to be the warning and the death knell of the Russian Empire. If the Central Powers can move out and control 4 green areas, this is a green area, so they've already got 1 here, so we can control 3 of these areas, and conversely, the Russians don't control any of these green or grey areas. The war's quite one-sided at that point, and Russia's going to collapse. Only if there's revolutionary turmoil in the air, basically. So, but that's the event. Sometimes it might say, you might get a bonus to your first combat of the phase, or you might have, recover a guy, or get a free trench. The events do certain different things. Some of them are pretty significant. That's a pretty significant game state change, but others, it's more of a fleeting, momentary bonus that you're going to get. From there, you go to your little movement phase, and basically you get to move, generally speaking, you get to move like 2 guys on the board. And what that does is it prevents you from saying, I've got a stack of 9 guys here, we're going to swing all the way down into the Rhine and make a push into Verdun after that's been vacated. And what that does, to me, it's both, it prevents really stupid ahistorical situations like that from happening. You can't ever surprise attack anyone in this game. The scale is just too large. And as such, it would I don't know, it would be very silly, I think, if you were able to do that. So you might be able to move 2 guys, and you can move basically from an area anywhere through controlled areas that you connected to an adjacent area that's friendly controlled. So you might move 2 guys down there. That's the maximum you can move. You might move a guy with an artillery piece down there because you want to do an attack with some artillery. But yeah, the movement is fairly limited. But, you can move a couple armies from all the way over on the western front, all the way over to the east front if you want to make a push out there. Or once Russia collapses, you can drain your forces and concentrate on the west to make that last push in 1918, see if you can make it happen. But that's the movement is quite limited. You have to be very careful about how and when you do your moves, because the only other way to move is post-combat kind of advancing and taking ground, which is very powerful, and you do need to take that into account. So you might move 2 guys, and that's basically it. If you're the Germans, you can optionally move your U-boats into unrestricted submarine warfare or through the Hague Convention boxes. Basically, you will do less damage to the British economy if you're in here, but you won't aggravate the US as much. If you're here, you'll hurt the British economy, but it's more likely that you're going to cause the US to enter the war by sinking their ships. That's effectively what that is. You can always optionally kind of move those around. And then you can mess around with your fleets coming out of Hanover and trying to blockade this, or trying to attack the British blockade, Battle of Jutland, all that kind of stuff. But this is kind of a little bit of a sideshow. Mostly, you've got 2 moves, and regardless of which power you are, you have 2 guys. So the movement's very, very restricted in that sense. What you're then going to do after you do all your moves is you do your combats. You do not have to declare all your combats. To kind of start with, you can just do one, see what happens, do another. But combats happen from one area to an adjacent area. You're not moving guys into an area, then resolving an attack. You just have a big fat stack of guys, and you're attacking this big fat stack of guys. And that's basically it. If you're able to force them to retreat, then you can optionally move in all of your guys. And that's what I talked about with the movement. You can move 2 guys in the movement phase, but if you can successfully do an attack, you get a big push and everyone moves. That's the only way to move substantial numbers of forces is through military means, which was interesting to play around with. So, what does an attack look like? Well, what we'll do is we'll just do one of these. We'll just pick some guys here. So, we have 3 German armies. They're in a trench, which trenches are defensive, so we don't really care about that. And they're going to go up against these 3 French armies in Verdun. And we also have we got a British Western Allied inspired leadership there, and we also have a Western Allies heavy artillery there. So let's just say that's what we got there, because these guys had to retreat into Paris, so not great. So this would be a terrible attack. You would never do this in real life, but we're just showing you some mechanics. You have to have some kind of heavy odds because there's so much dice rolling. So this game, you can see there's no combat factors on any of the units. It's not that complicated. You just have a roll-off between units, and you have to breach enemy trenches first. So what you're going to do is you say, to attack, you have to flip a unit to its spent side, which is important. You say, I'm going to attack, and then basically the defender has to pick which of their units is going to defend. However, you always have to start with the trenches. Got to break through the trenches before you can start doing any damage to the enemies. And that's part of the reason you would never make this attack. You need to have lots of guys. So the German player rolls a dice, and they roll a 5. And then the French player rolls a die in defense, and they also roll a 5. There's no terrain in Verdun. If you look here, mountains and marshes kind of give you a +1 in defense. Do the marshes do that? The mountains do. I guess the marshes don't. If you're in a mountain area like the Rhine or Austria or Venetia, you can get a defensive bonus. But either way, these are equal. And what's interesting about this game, which is very different to a lot of other games, is ties go to the attacker. So defending in this one is quite difficult. You have to have numbers to defend and not rely on bonuses. And the numbers and the economy and the attrition is such a huge factor in this game. So if we did nothing else, this would flip over. We've breached this first line of trenches. Great. So then the Germans are going to say, we're going to attack with our next guy. Got to get through the second line of trenches. Not great. They're going to roll a die. Roll the 4. Not great. French going to roll. And they rolled a 3. So we do defeat them. So we breach their second line of trenches. So now this is the last attacking German unit. So they're going to flip over to spent. And now we're going to get to decide which of these we're going to defend with. So let's say we're going to defend with a French guy. But on top of that, what we're actually going to do is we're going to fire our artillery. We're going to do a defensive artillery barrage as well. So we're going to spend our artillery, and what artillery does is you get to roll 2 dice and keep the highest. So and you can only do that. We'll say you can only do that. It says roll 2 dice when attacking or defending, and you flip to the fired side. So this is what our counter battery technology. We had to research technology to unlock this capacity. Without that, you can only attack with there's no defensive artillery or anything like that. So they're gonna roll. So Germans are gonna roll first. You roll the 1. That's absolutely terrible. So the French roll 2 dice. I cannot believe it. They've rolled snake eyes. So you keep the highest, and ties go to the defender. So the defender's gonna flip a guy. That's such a me roll. I can't believe I've done that. Welcome to the player's aid. So now the Germans are out of guys to attack with. So you just have to call off the attack. You're done. So you put your little spent guys back in the Rhine, and these guys. And this is the harsh part. If you don't force them to move back or do anything else, these trenches just get repaired. They get flipped back over. So really, we've only done 1 attack to these dudes. We're going to put our British guys and our French guys. So we spent 1 French guy, and we made them use up their artillery, so they can't use that defensively again, or they can't use it offensively against us on their turn. So, and this is why you don't do those kinds of attacks, because you have to have these big stacks against smaller stacks to really make sure that you've got enough rolls to beat them enough, and then once they're all spent, and you do 1 more additional attack and succeed, then everyone retreats out of that area. So the game forces you into doing World War I type things where you've got big stacks on big stacks, slogging it out, trying to attrit each other to the point at which everyone's expended, and then you push them back. And guess what? By that time, you're expended. Then it's going to be their turn. They're going to start flipping guys back over and push you right back. It's really, really interesting how it plays out in that sense. So now we've done with our attack phase. You'd make some other attacks and bits and pieces. Then you go to your production phase. So you check your modifiers. You have all these productions that are printed on the map that you've got. I think Germany starts with 12 or so. And as such, they can then optionally give money to the Central Allies. They can give money to Bulgaria if they've joined the war on their side. You can give bits on Turkey. You can give some money away. But we'll just say that they've got X amount of money. You can have some negative modifiers from events and from technologies, and if the submarine warfare doesn't go well for you. And so, yeah, if there are events that impinge on your production, that gets checked. Now, you resolve your warfare. So it's interesting, on the German turn, the Germans roll for U-boat attrition to see if they kind of survive and do well. On the Western Allies turn, you roll on their attack table. So if they're able to kind of survive out, then they'll do some attacks. So we're going to roll 2d6 for each one of our U-boats. So we'll do first U-boat, and we rolled a 5. And so you consult this little chart here, this U-boat attrition table. We rolled a 5, they become spent. Great, that's not good. So then we roll for the other one. We rolled a 6. 6 is also spent, that's bad. So basically nothing happens with those. And then, conversely, after all the Germans are done, it's the Western Allies, so they can do all their attacks. They resolve the U-boat attacks, and Western Allies roll 2d6 for each fresh U-boat. Well, they're both spent, so because we rolled poorly on our attrition table, so these guys aren't actually going to do anything in this instance. What we've got now is we've got all our production points together. We've got 12 production points. What you do is then you can spend them to recover units. You can spend them to build new units, and that's the majority of what you'll be using them for. So to flip a guy, it costs 1 point. So we're going to flip all of our guys over that were spent in that big attack. 1, 2, 3. And it's very interesting. You'll do all this back and forth because now them counterattacking you is going to be just as painful as it was for you to attack them. If you had new guys, you can bring on a new guy for 1. You can bring on a new guy fresh for 2. And in the early game, that's important. You build guys and you can put them out. If you're so inclined and you've got guys, if your fleets are back in port, you can refit those if they end up spent, and or you can give money to your opponents as well. The Germans can build a trench for 1. one point. Everywhere's kind of filled up with trenches. Mountainous areas can only hold one trench, and they already had one to start with. So you can build a trench for one. We can build a trench for another one, and it's cheap for them to build trenches. Everyone else, it costs them two, so it's actually very expensive to do that. But that's, you have this little mini production phase, and from there, after you're done with that, you then go to your little technology phase, and basically you have this little technology deck, and you flip a card. So this is G1. Because the number is a 1, we can keep that. That becomes a technology we can have. This is A3. You can't just keep this. You have to wait until you have A1 and A2. Then you can keep A3. Well, guess what? We already have both of those, so we can keep A3. So you just do 1, but and in the late game, your technology kind of you kind of get the ball rolling. So if we pulled P3, we've only got P1. We would just discard this, and our technology phases are nothing, basically. So the technology, there's no investments in there. It's just kind of a random draw, and you're hoping to get those ones early, so that then you can subsequently keep the ball rolling and try to keep ahead of those. And those have different effects. Sometimes it opens up different parts of that U-boat table. There's U-boat technologies. So this is like a success if the Western Allies have the U1 technology that isn't active. So the Western Allies are desperately trying to get the U technologies out to prevent as many attacks from the U-boats as possible. It's anti-submarine warfare and all that kind of stuff. Or you've got air war. You develop planes, you develop dogfighting, reconnaissance. You get out these air superiority markers after you do some roll-offs. Those give you bonuses in combats and can allow you defenders to win on ties if they've got those present. So you can get all sorts of bonuses from the technologies, but it is just draw a card. Are you able to use it? Yes or no? And that's basically it. Once you're done with that turn, you flip over all your artillery that you spent. You get those back. And then you move on to the Western Allies. And just like we did before, Western Allies draw an event card, do an event, move 2 units, and they do some counterattacks. Or if you've defended a whole bunch and all your guys are all spent, you might be like, can't launch any attacks because you can only attack with fresh guys, and I don't have enough. Everyone's spent. So you're like, great, I'm going to not do anything. I'm going to sit here, get all my production points, flip everyone over so they're fresh, and we're just going to wait and last another season. And it's a very World War I feeling sometimes, but it's thematic, and eventually, one's going to smash themselves on the other, maybe not have enough points to refill everyone because you've hurt their economy through various bits and pieces. If they've had to feed money into the Central Allies, or they've had a negative event, or they've just had catastrophic attacks and everyone's spent, then you can kind of smash them back a little bit. It's really, really neat. But that's the game. It is not a complicated game. I was very surprised at how easy this was to learn and how fairly straightforward it is. You roll a lot of dice. It's only ever 1 dice at a time, basically, because you've got to pick which units are attacking which. And that's really important for the Western Allies because you might have a Belgian unit, a British unit, and French units defending together, and who actually has the production points to refill their guys is very important, especially early on with those Belgians who don't have any production, and they have to late of turn get fed them so that next turn they can refill. There's a bit to it. There's a couple other ancillary tracks going on here. We've got East Africa, and down here you've got the Near East where you're doing it's more point to point. There's these little tracks that you're moving up and down, trying to attack or at least impede the Ottoman Empire, and they're trying to defend respectively. But there is the economy is very important in this. It's not a huge, this isn't a deep, complex, crunchy economy game, but you have to hurt the enemy economy to be able to hurt their troops long term, and it's such an interesting exercise to go through. So that's kind of how the core of this game works. There's obviously some chromy bits to it on top of that, but that's the core. It's not a complicated game. Very happy with how it plays. You get into doing some real big attacks, lots of different attacks. This is kind of a swirling mess on the Eastern Front. Western Front can feel very static once you get your trenches built and the defenses there. But, one poor decision, like I attacked with the Italians, big mistake, don't do that. I flipped, and so they all flipped. well, they only have like 1 point to flip one guy. That was my mistake. Then the Austrians just walked on in, and then it was a nightmarish, and then they're swinging around into southern France, and all of a sudden the Western Allies look like they're probably going to lose the game. But that's... So you can do some ahistorical things, but if you stick to some history, then you get some, at least at this high level, you get some pretty nice little bits of simulation, which I've enjoyed. So that's how this game works. What we'll do is we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So that was a look at the map.
I think the map looks really good. It
does.
It's kind of, it really fits with the theme of the game. I think it's very big. Like we talked about it, there's some space. Put some extra, maybe put an extra a production point track here, and that was one thing maybe, or even some of the markers where you could see, some of the cards are like, stick around for a while.
Yeah.
There should be a box or something. Yeah. But overall, well done. I love the train key. Love the colors.
Yeah, I think the production value is very high on this.
Yes.
Right?
Well, it's a mounted map board.
Big, thick gray core counters, pre-rounded.
Yep, very nice.
No little nubs on them or anything.
Glossy, nice cards.
And I enjoy the artwork on the cards where it like kind of looks the way that it does. It's always nice.
You know, we are told sometimes that, you know, we're not interested in paper maps. That's actually not true. I enjoy paper maps.
Yep.
Because what do you have to do with these mounted map boards? You have to sometimes lay heavy boxes on them for 2-3 hours to get them to flatten out. This one wasn't that bad. I think you had to do some.
Yes, but I did that like mid-afternoon. So I probably had
hours.
these getting laid out for 2 hours.
We started playing about 5:30.
Yeah, I probably set them up around 3ish. Yeah, okay. So like, yeah, some games you got to do overnight. This is not one of them.
But this has a nice mounted map board. I like mounted maps. They're good.
Me too.
I also don't mind paper maps. I mean, they're good as well.
Yes.
That's me. That's my choice.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, this game does have the option to play it up to 4 players.
I would love to try that to see. It would be interesting.
Yeah, basically what you're doing with that is, because the game turn is the Central Powers player controls Germany and the Central Allies, and then the Entente player has the Western Allies and the Eastern Allies, and it goes Germany, Western Allies, Eastern Allies, Central Allies.
Yeah.
So if you do play with 4 players, you're basically just creating a lot of downtime for yourself. So just
very true.
But I think in a lot of multiplayer games, that's kind of what you would expect.
Yep.
You know, you're going to get attacked, so you will have to do some things.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're just playing half the game basically.
Yeah, agreed.
But
I don't know that I would recommend that. I think it can be done.
I would have no issue doing with that.
Yeah, it would be fine.
You got to have 4 friends because you're going to sit down for
6 hours, 7 hours.
Yeah. I think it's about that long. But if you've played, you know, we would play this much quicker next time, I think.
Oh, there's no doubt.
There was a lot of nosing around.
Well, a lot of reading the cards, understanding things. The other thing we did talk about, speaking of the player count, while it's not a solo game, this is very well suited to a solo game.
There is no reason you couldn't solo this game.
No hidden information. No, like you don't hide your technology, you don't hide your cards.
Yeah, you draw a card, resolve the event, and then you move some guys.
You push your guys.
And do combats.
You can then just switch to the other side of the board, draw their card.
Yep.
Move their stuff around, buy their stuff, and then move to the next power. It would be it'd be very easy to do that.
It's not a traditional CDG, so you don't need to use like a CDG solo method or anything like that.
Nope.
It's just flip a card for the guy, do the things. Like this would be a very easy game to solo.
Yes.
And it would, I don't know. At this scale, it's easy to just sit in the next seat and be like, okay, what's my best option? Am I going to be offensive? Am I going to be defensive? What am I trying to do here?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, you can't launch any surprise attacks in this game.
No. Well, because you can only move 2 units.
Yeah.
That's not a lot. So I kind of made that comment a couple of times. Because I only had 3 or 4 units, say, in the Rhine, just enough really to defend that, because I wanted everything going against
the Somme.
Against the Somme. I could never really, midstream, I'm going to move 6 units down there and try to take you out. That's just not the way it works.
And so I know that you know that.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, I'm only going to leave
3 units
guys
there
in Verdun because I know I can ferry my other guys into the Somme because that's where they need. I think this is one of those games where people struggle with that. I think people are like, oh, I just have a hard time like forgetting what I was doing over there. I'm like,
Yeah.
You just don't. This isn't that kind of game.
Yeah.
It's everything is
Pretty
very
straightforward
and
yeah.
very like
you kind of
in
know
your
where
face.
you know where you need to go. I did like, once again, I said earlier in the first segment, some of these the space placement is really key to the game. Hanover's a really good example, and actually all 6 of these territories come together at the same point, but that does not make them adjacent.
Yeah.
So you really have to go through Belgium to get anywhere there. They give kind of an advantage to the Entente because the Somme is adjacent to Verdun and Paris. So you can really be a little more maneuverable there and react more quickly, although you can still only move 2 units.
Yes.
So you can't move your entire, army. So I liked that. I thought it was very well done. Once again, Eastern Front, also very well done. We actually look for that in a lot of these kind of games that we play because it should be hard. It shouldn't be easy on that front.
It's always fun when you move into an area, do a big attack. You're like, yeah, I took this area, and then like the way that they retreat, or the options that O2, you're like,
did I really want to take that area that I just took?
What a precarious position to put myself into. That stuff's always fun.
Yep.
Because you're like, I have to make progress.
Yep.
But it's so precarious.
Like when I lost Prussia there, kind of at the end of 2016, that was pretty.
2016.
I keep saying 1916. That was very precarious. But I remember when I lost it, I thought to myself, I'll get that back. I'm like, where the hell am I going to get it back from? Because there's nothing adjacent to it that really made sense. Because if I moved up from here...
Yeah, move up from Poland, you lose Poland.
I get attacked from... And it's just, that's so fascinating because it creates angst. It creates a need to plan and prepare. It's just so great. It's just so great. That is the one element about this game that I actually really also liked, that there weren't those big swingy events. Like in a normal card-driven game.
Yeah.
Not a card-driven game, but... Because there are some card-driven games where you're like, oh, I just eliminated 4 of your units in this. Yeah, I can then hammer you. There ain't nothing of that in this. No. So I liked it. Overall, loved this game. We talked about it, even though it was 7 or 8 hours for us. We want to play this immediately again.
Yes, I would.
Now, we have 7 or 8 other World War I games we're trying to get to this month, so I don't think we're going to spend more time on this one now.
No,
but we'd love to come back.
Yeah, this is one, and because it's easy to learn and like play.
Yeah,
it's easy to revisit this.
Agreed.
I don't have to.
You're not gonna have to refresh yourself on a 50-page rule book that's very complex.
Yes.
Very straightforward. There are some special rules for the first turn. You got to remember. I would like to see those maybe written on the board. That was another thing I thought about as we were playing, and I can't remember what they were, but it was. Some of the stuff for the Germans.
Yeah, you have to attack into Belgium and do the Schlieffen.
Just write that on the board. To me, that's one of the things I don't mind seeing on a board like this, particularly in a lighter game. That East African front was pretty cool, too. There were some bush wars going on down there.
Yeah.
The stuff over in Basra and
East.
Very interesting. It never really materialized for us, but
again, it's at such a huge scale that you don't get like the micro factional wars that you have in something like Pursuit of Glory, which is like it's the Paths of Glory, but
there's 3 of those, right? Yeah. But it focuses on the Near East.
This is at such a high level. Like there's like 3 boxes.
It's just boxes.
And it's attacking back and forth on a. But like every time you move forward, the Ottoman Empire is like.
Because and that was something early on in the game I talked about as the Central Powers and Germany. You really want to work on trying to whittle away the Allied production points. You do that through that submarine warfare. Some of the events that happen. But that's also a great source, Sinai and Basra. It's like, I can make you lose 2 production points down there for
if you can get out
the British. Right? It's hard, but man, if you could get that accomplished, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So I like that because I could focus on that next time. Or maybe I could focus a little more on those bush wars down there. just interesting. There's a lot here.
Yes, yes. I had a good time with it, and it's not overly complex. And whilst we played it for a long time, it was enjoyable for a long time as well. You chuck some dice, do some
Yeah.
World War One. This felt like World War One.
It felt very much like World
That's
War
what
I.
I wanted from the game. I wanted it to,
Yeah.
there's like even in this game, there are options to do things ahistorically.
Yep.
There's options for things to go differently.
Yep. Or there's
But
options to do what they did, and
Yeah,
that's
but
fine.
There's nothing that's insanely unrealistic that we've discovered where it's like, oh, this is a kind of a stupid thing that happened. None of that.
no.
And like, it feels like you've got these just titanic armies and nations just butting up against each other. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
And you do those things, and that's I get that feel from this, and that's what I wanted from this, and it gave me that. So I'm very happy with this.
I agree.
mean, it's second edition. It means it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
They wanted to get it back into print, and they've done it. So I'm very happy about this one.
I would say you need to get this one if you're a World War I buff. If you're really a grand strategy game buff.
Yeah.
This is a great game for both of those.
They probably
things.
all already have it, and we're like
They
the
probably
chumps
do.
who
We're
don't,
late
and
to
we're
the
like,
late to the
we're
party.
finally just playing this.
Really like it.
Yeah, it was good.
I would have to say this is, we haven't played a ton of World War I games.
We will
but
by the end of the month.
we
though.
will. I like Fields of Despair from GMT Games. This is also really, really, really good.
It's
I
good.
can't wait to get Paths of Glory on the board, though.
Yeah, I like this scale for this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think World War One for me is one of those conflicts where it was just these. It was very much, and I've had this discussion with a number of people. This was like really the end of the old world. This is the collapse of all of these empires because they just woke up one day, and that's not true, but they just woke up one day and decided to hurl themselves at each other in one last gargantuan struggle, and everyone lost basically.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, there was no real winner.
Yeah.
Because of the devastation, both economically, the loss of life.
Yeah.
The change of the global
Well,
economy.
Those are the real winners. Is everyone else in the world who was colonized, who then were able to see, oh, there might be an end to this, and there was a lot of independence that the seeds of which started in World War One.
You're right. Yep.
But like the European continent was never been the same.
Yeah.
But frankly,
I mean, it changed the landscape.
Yes.
Not only physically, politically, socioeconomically, and really set it up for World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, this war ended and really caused World War II to happen.
Well, yeah, a huge influence on
obviously
that.
30, 40 years later, but it happened because of the way this ended. So
the games at this scale give you that, or they should at least, and this one does, and that's what I enjoy about learning about World War One. It's just such an interesting concept.
Yeah,
you don't get this kind of conflict in modern day, thankfully. But like seeing it at this level is I don't know, it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's different.
So, Lamps Are Going Out, World War One from Compass Games. This is the second edition. It's available now. Go get it. Had a blast with this. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.